Happy Monday, guys. Today we're going to talk about what you can do when you're going through your inspection as a buyer.
You better get fired up.
Happy Monday, man. My favorite day of the week. I think I might be in the a unique party in that situation, but man, I love Mondays. Today we're going to talk about inspections and what you as the buyer have the opportunity to do, right? I think a lot of sellers maybe don't think about this. I think even a lot of realtors don't necessarily think about this. But once a seller goes under contract in Florida, in 99% of cases, the seller has no out. There's no contingency that allows that seller to get out and decide that they're not going to sell their home or whatever it is. And I think that's really important to note, right? I think it's important also as a buyer to understand that when you're going through an inspection, no matter what issues you have or what you're facing, or how much negotiating you can or cannot do with the seller, you always have the ability to ensure that you can get out unless you've written in, hey, we won't back out no matter what, or we're giving guaranteed escrow funds or something like that. You have the ability to get out at any time and get your escrow deposit back. And you're also in 100% control. So if you decide, hey, we've got these 17 issues, but none of them are that big of a deal, I'm going to try to negotiate, but if I fail, I'll still move forward. You're 100% in the driver's seat, right? That's a really important distinction to make because not a lot of buyers fully understand that. And I think it's important to kind of start with that. So I try every time I'm working with a buyer and we go into an inspection, I always say, listen, no matter what pops up, we can negotiate, we can think about it, we can back out, we can do a million different things. I want you to remember you have the ability to move forward. Okay. Just remember that. And a lot of times that'll go, oh, okay, I'm still in control, right? That control is a big part of it. So what tends to happen is you go under contract, meaning everybody's signed off on the agreement, right? Everything's in writing. And then you're going to have, 3, 5, 7, 10, maybe longer, but usually it's, 5 to 10 days is what you're going to have for an inspection contingency period. And when that allows you to do as a buyer is to get a home inspector to come in and do visual inspections. So they're not going to do any type of intrusive testing like cutting into walls or, anything like that, unless it's in writing between you and the seller as a buyer, and you've hired the right inspector to do that, right? But I'll tell you, I've sold hundreds of homes. I've only had intrusive testing, I think 2 or 3 times. I've had 0 in Florida. All of them were in Minnesota. All of them were investors. And all of them were homes that visually you could see a ton of mold, right? So we wanted to see how deep into the walls has it seeped. And, maybe it's up to here on the outside, but when you go deeper into the walls, it's way up the wall. And now we know we've got more damage than we thought. So that's the only time I've ever seen it. It's pretty rare that you're going to see intrusive testing agreed to on the behalf of a seller. And honestly, you're not going to find a buyer who wants to pay for that very often. It's expensive. So now you go through and you get your report, right? What's a typical report look like? Even new construction is going to have 5, 10 issues on it, right? You're going to have little things that the builder missed, and maybe you missed when you were walking through the property, whatever it is. Not a big deal. And honestly, in most cases, they're all really simple, small things. They're not very expensive. Builder's going to fix them 99% of the time anyway. Not a big deal, right? When you're looking at pre-sales, it really depends on a lot of things. It depends on how old the property is. It depends on any deferred maintenance, how much deferred maintenance, are they major things, minor things, that kind of stuff. But typically what we're looking for as, well, I won't say that. I'll say typically I, as a buyer's agent, am looking for things that a buyer would call me in 3 to 6 months and say, Joe, why did you let me buy this home? Those are the things that I'm looking for. So typically I'm looking for major plumbing issues that aren't $500 or $1,000. Maybe they're $3, $4, $5,000. You're going to need to, completely do some of the piping and stuff like that. Electric issues that are expensive. One that's seemingly simple, but it's not. It's expensive. Is if you've got a specific brand of electric panel, most likely in your garage. There's a couple different brands that if you have them, you cannot get insurance on them in a lot of cases because you can't get the insurance, you can't get the loan. So if I know you've got that type of panel, I know that's going to be a big problem. And I've only had 2 swapped out, and they were between $3,000 and $4,000 to get them swapped out. And in all honesty, I think the last one I did was probably 12 to 18 months ago. With prices the way they're at, it wouldn't surprise me if they're over $4,000 now, right? That's a pretty expensive issue. Another one is safety hazards. We'll see, and this isn't expensive, but a lot of times if you've got exposed wiring, a lot of times in the attic, you'll have exposed wiring for whatever issue or for whatever reason. And a lot of times that is something that isn't expensive at all. In fact, a homeowner can do it themselves. But even if you hire it out, it's going to cost you more to get the guy out than to actually do the work, right? But it's a safety issue, so you want to make sure it's done, whether you do it before you purchase the home or after. So safety issues. I'm also looking at, mold is something that, having sold in Minnesota for several years, I kind of had in the back of my mind that I was looking at. But in all honesty, in Florida here, I've seen, if I've sold hundreds, I've seen thousands of homes. I've probably seen 3, 4, 5 that have had mold issues. I will say, if you're working a lot with investors, you're going to see homes that are probably in the, $100,000 to $200,000 range. A lot of times you will see that mold. I don't really work in that price point a whole lot, so I don't see it as often. But that's something I'm worried about. And then the other two major things are the AC and the roof. Now, what I have seen is with the AC, I forget what it is. It's like a 13, 14 degree differential that the AC has to be kicking out. If it's not doing it, but it is kicking out some differential, maybe it's 8 degrees, right? And it's supposed to be 13, 14. If you do a simple cleaning, right? You get somebody over and they do a $150 to $200 cleaning job on your AC. It's never not gone back and worked and been that full 13, 14 degree difference. So that's pretty easy to take care of. You're going to have older ACs, and this is something you want to think about before you put the offer in, not mid inspection contingency period, which I've seen, and it creates a lot of issues, a lot of distrust issues, and deals start to fall apart. And I'll kind of go through that here in a second. So ACs are generally warranted for 10 years. And a lot of ACs, though, I think mine went out at 17, 18 years. So it's not crazy to see them 15, 20 years old. And you don't know, are they going to go out at 10 years and 6 months? Are they going to go to 15 years, 20 years? You have no idea. So a lot of times what I have seen is a buyer will come in, they'll put the offer in. They know the AC is, let's say, 16 years old, but they put the offer in at whatever price, and then they go through the inspection. And even though it was disclosed that it was 16 years old and there's no issues on the inspection report, that buyer will then ask the seller to cover all or a portion of a replacement. And in that case, and here's a little bit of a negotiation tip, the seller tends to feel like they were taken advantage of, right? Because they think, you knew it was 16 years old, nothing popped up in the inspection, so you're taking advantage of me. You could have tried to negotiate this on day one. Why are you trying to do it now? Now, I don't think a lot of buyers, at least certainly not most buyers, are trying to take advantage of sellers in that situation. What I see is on day one, they're so excited about the house that they say, yes, Joe, we want it no matter what. How do we win this? And then we create an offer that will ensure that they've got their best odds of winning it. And then when they win it, they're thinking, okay, I've got this in hand. Now I got to get through inspection. Oh my gosh, the AC works, but it's 16 years old. How much is an AC, Joe? $6,000, $7,000 to get it installed. Wow. Let's ask for a new one. That's how it goes. They're not thinking, am I taking advantage of this person? How can I screw them? Whatever. It's just when they were in the excited period of, oh my gosh, I won the offer, or oh my gosh, I'm ready to put in an offer. They're not thinking about that AC, right? Or if they are, they're downplaying how concerned they are about it until they get it, and then that concern comes up. I would say that's a very tough concern to overcome. If you bring it up in the initial offer, it's a little bit more understandable, right? Here's another thing a lot of people kind of forget about. The people who buy and sell homes are humans, and they're filled with emotions. So you've really got to think about how to present it to people to keep the emotions at bay. So again, if you come after the offer and you're on day 6 of a 7-day inspection period and nothing popped up on the inspection and you knew it was 16 years old in the beginning, the emotions of the seller, whether it's validated or not, whether it's true or not, are you took advantage of me as a buyer, right? So to be able to think about that, and if you want to negotiate up front. Now it's a little bit more palatable from the seller because they're saying, okay, I understand their concern. Maybe I agree with it or don't. Maybe I'm willing to drop my price or I'm not. Maybe I've already dropped my price because my listing agent and I talked about it and they said, hey, your home's worth $500, but because of this AC, let's drop it to $494. Maybe, right? Maybe not. But at least you can have the conversation. But knowing that that is something going on up here and that can be a challenge mentally, I would say as a buyer, really think about how you're going to negotiate that deal going in, because you could kill the deal by doing something like that. So that's another one. And then roofs, of course, right? If you got roof leaks, that's probably the scariest thing for most people, especially if it's shingle. I'll tell you, I've heard that you can have a metal roof leak. I've never seen it. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Obviously, it happens. I got roofing friends that told me it happens, but it's obviously much rarer than it is with shingles, right? One thing that I see all the time is, and I'm making this up, but if I sold 10 homes that are at least, let's say, 15 years old in Port St. Lucie, I'm probably going to see 1, 2, 3 of them that when you look at the sheathing underneath, right, you're in the attic and you're on the underside of the roof, you're going to see staining. And that's from an old leak, or it could be from a lot of different things. But the inspector, unless it's obvious, right, it's wet, it's dripping, whatever, the inspector is typically going to say something to the extent of, staining found on the underside. Here's a photo. Please contact a licensed insured roofer to tell you if this is an active leak or an old leak, right? So now you don't know. That can become a big concern. And this is why I'm such a proponent as a listing agent of getting pre-listing inspections. You might have a roof that has no issues. You get a home that has no issues. And then all of a sudden you get that report back and you're like, oh my gosh, but now you got a buyer on the hook and it scares them. So they walk, and that's your best buyer, and you just lost them over something that might not even be a leak. So if you get that pre-listing inspection done before you put it on the market, and you know that that's a problem, you can proactively call your listing agent and say, hey, Joe, can we hold off for a couple days? I want to get the roofer over. I want him to see if it's an issue. If it is, we're going to address it and fix it. If it's not, I'm going to get him to put something in writing that say it's an old leak. It just rained. It's completely dry. It's good to go, right? Now we've got something to be able to make that first buyer, your best buyer, feel comfortable and confident. So that's incredibly important as well. So those are the major things that we are looking for as buyer's agents, or I should say I am looking for as a buyer's agent. I'm not typically going to care so much about cracks in flooring tile or laminate peeling on the inside of a cabinet door or a tear in a screen. I'm not saying these issues don't matter, but what I'm saying is it's a used home. You're going to have little issues like this. These are issues that are aesthetic. If you got a tear in your screen, the home works perfectly fine. You can live like that for the rest of your life. You'll be completely fine. And honestly, after you own the place for 2-3 months, you won't even know. I got screens tears right now. And now I'm thinking about it because I'm sharing it with you. But otherwise, I never think about it. And it doesn't in any way impact my happiness, right? So a lot of those things I'll usually tell buyers, hey, you're buying a used home. These two things are pretty typical. My opinion, but it's up to the buyer. The buyer's in the driver's seat. My opinion is, if you've got something that's going to cost you $1,000 or $2,000, and it's something that, you know, you can fix the majority of it with a couple Home Depot trips on the weekends, you've got to kind of assume that you're going to have that on any resale home, right? Any one of them. So when you look at home sold prices and you're comparing, like, okay, this is worth this, so then my home must be worth this, the home I'm putting an offer in on. That home had $1,000, $2,000 dollar issues as well. So when you're putting that offer in, you can compare them apples to apples in most cases, right? If it's a bigger buck item, it's understandable. But for $1,000 to $2,000, that's pretty typical. So now these items pop up and you are concerned about them. What are your options? Number one, you can move forward. You can just say, hey, let's move forward. I'm not worried about it. I got it. The only concern with that is, will your lender approve? Right? If you've got issues that are big enough, especially if you've got a government-backed loan, FHA or VA, they might say, time out, we got to get this issue fixed or we're not going to move forward. Another issue might have is insurance says, hey, we're not going to insure the property, or we will insure the property, but it's going to have the roof as an exclusion because the roof is leaking right now. So that's where your lender's going to say, we're not going to fund it either, right? So you got to get those things repaired before you're going to get the funding of that home in most cases, right? But most things you can overlook, especially if you have a conventional loan. If you're cash, you can overlook just about anything, right? So what's another option? Another option is you can back out. You can just say, hey, it could be one issue, and it could be the light bulb is not working. And when you put a new bulb in, it does work. It's $1.39, right? But you say, I'm good. I want to back out. you can back out. And you'll get your escrow deposit back. You've lost nothing other than time and the cost of the inspection, and you can back out for any reason, right? So it's important also as a seller to remember that. A lot of times as a strategy, I talked about pre-listing inspections, I'll have my seller get a pre-listing inspection, not just because I'm concerned about issues that'll arise before we get that buyer, but I want to ensure that we're giving our seller the best opportunity to nail down that buyer, right? There are a lot of buyers who will put in 2-3 offers on properties, and then they'll wait to see the inspections to see which one they're moving forward on, and they'll pull out of the others. Well, we don't want to be that seller, right? We don't want to take on that risk. Or they'll put a longer inspection period, maybe 10 days, maybe 15. I've seen 15 days. And while they've got that inspection period going on, and you'll see they don't schedule the inspection until the last day or the day before the last day, they're hunting for other properties, seeing if they'll find something better. If they do, they'll use the inspection period to cancel their deal with you, and they'll move forward on the new property, right? They can even get that other property under contract first and then come and cancel yours because they can back out for any reason. So as a listing agent, I'm thinking, if I get multiple offers on this property and I got a pre-listing inspection showing them what is wrong with the home already, I can ask them, hey, we've got multiple offers. Whoever comes to us with a strong offer and doesn't have an inspection contingency, that's probably the offer we're going to go with. Now we've got a great opportunity to get offers that don't have an inspection contingency, increasing the odds of us closing as a seller, right? So that's incredibly important too. So yes, you can move forward and do nothing. Yes, you can back out and get your money back. But what about everything in between, right? So typically there's 2 options for solving anything that you and the seller have negotiated, right? And we'll get to that in a second. But let's say you've got 3 issues. You can request all 3 issues be taken care of by the seller. And then they can counter and say, hey, we'll take care of number 1, but we're not going to take care of number 2 and 3. And you can counter and say, okay, I appreciate you taking care of number 1, and I'll forget about number 3, but you got to do number 2. And you go back and forth as many times as you want, as long as it's within the restraints of that inspection contingency period. If you're going back and forth so much that you're going to run out of time, you can submit an addendum to extend that contingency period as well, right? So once you come to terms, well, let's first say if you don't come to terms, what happens? If you want the 2 things fixed and they're only going to fix the 1, you can back out, right? You can take your escrow deposit, you can leave, and you can go find another home. If you come to terms and they say, hey, we'll fix the first 2 things, but we're not going to fix the 3rd, and you say, okay, that's good enough. Now you've got 2 options, right? The first option is they actually fix the 2 issues, okay? If you're going to do that, you're going to want to write in my opinion, how it is you conclude that those issues have been fixed. I've seen it before where a seller thinks, hey, my husband went to Home Depot, he fixed these 2 things, we're good to go, let's move forward. And the buyer comes back and says, I don't like the way it's done. It wasn't done by a professional, it wasn't a licensed insured person, whatever, a million different excuses. I'm not going to move forward with this. Who's right? Well, the answer's in the contract, right? And if the contract doesn't say anything, that's going to be a challenging situation. So you want to make sure that you write it in airtight, exactly what needs to be done and exactly how you determine black or white if it's been done correctly. So a lot of times what I will write in is, hey, issue number 9.3.7 on the DBJ, that's who we use for inspections, DBJ inspection from September 3rd of 2023 states that, and then whatever the issue is, seller is responsible for fixing this issue, and DBJ will come back out to do a re-inspect, and they will be the determining factor of whether or not it got done appropriately. So now it's up to DBJ, who we trust, assuming the buyer trusts them and the seller trusts them, right? Or let's say it's that roofing issue we were talking about. Forget DBJ, we can say, hey, we need a licensed and insured inspector to put in writing. So if for some reason it's an issue, the buyer will have something that they can hold on to in the future to go back to that roofer and say, hey, you said it was fixed. It's been a month and I'm still having issues. So we'll get it in writing from a licensed insured roofer that, hey, this is good. But again, if that's the case, then in the contract, I'm going to write, you are to fix these things, Mr. Seller, and we require that a licensed and insured roofer in writing tell us that these issues have been repaired, right? Now, I feel more comfortable as a buyer's agent. I'm sure my buyer feels comfortable too. So that's the first way to do it, is to actually fix the problem, right? The second way to do it is to say, let's get some estimates, or maybe you don't get some estimates, maybe a guess. You can do it any way. Everything's negotiable, right? But typically, I'm going to get 2 or 3 estimates. We're going to take the middle of the 3, or we're going to take the average of the 2, and that amount is going to be used as a credit, right? So now let's just say the roof is going to be $1,500, and let's say we've got I don't know, some other issue that's $500, right? That's $2,000. Now it's my responsibility, let's say I'm the buyer, to take care of those issues after closing, but we're either going to drop the price or get a credit, or they're going to cover our closing costs or whatever. I don't care. It doesn't matter as long as it equals $2,000, right? That's a typical way that it's done. And in all honesty, that's the most typical way that it's done. The third way, I said there were 2, but now I'm thinking about a third. The third thing that I've seen happen is a little bit of a mixture of the 2, but it's more the first one, right? So let's say we go back to those 2 issues that are $1,500 and $500, but, and this will typically happen with roof redos, right? Especially if it's a cash buyer. You're going to redo the roof. You're going to put on a whole new roof, but it's going to take 6 weeks. And the buyer and the seller want to close in 3 weeks. A lot of times what they'll say is, okay, let's put aside 125, 150% of that cost in an escrow account on behalf of the seller, and that will cover the fees, and then any remaining will go back to the seller. So for example, let's say that the roof is going to be $20,000 and you agree to 150%. Okay, that's $30,000. So if the seller is supposed to get 100 grand back at closing, they're not going to get 100 grand back. They're going to get 70 grand back. 30 grand is going to be put into an escrow account. And now when that roofer comes out and fixes the roof, if it's 20 grand will come out, and that 10 grand will go back to the seller, right? However, we've been seeing this a lot in the last couple of years. What if roofing costs go up and we haven't signed the paperwork yet? Okay. So now we agree that we're going to do 150% of the estimate. And then 2 weeks prior, the roofer calls and says, hey, we got a problem. It's going to actually be $22,000 because costs have gone up 10%, blah, blah, blah. You're covered as a buyer because we get the 30 grand in there. So now instead of getting 10 grand back, they'll get 8 grand back, right? Now, if it goes over the 30 grand, you got a problem as a buyer. Not that you can't necessarily go after them, but it depends upon what your paperwork says as to whether or not you're going to get it. What that does, though, is it solves the issue of, hey, I got to close early, but this problem still needs to be done, and we can't get it done in time, right? It solves that problem. So whatever problems you got, there's solutions for everything. I just went down about every rabbit hole I can think of for an inspection. But if you guys have any scenarios that you're thinking of that I didn't touch on, or if you've got ideas for different videos in the future, feel free to leave those ideas or questions in the comments, whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, and we will always get back to you with the answers. Guys, I appreciate you joining us. We're here every single Monday at the same time. We'll see you next week. Have a wonderful day.